Wow. I love that.
Yeah. It really gave me such an appreciation for nature. And so nature is my church, right? And spent a lot of time in nature as a kid. And I think that became the impetus for everything that I do now.
Well, we should have just gone under the 300-year-old oak tree at my place.
Yes.
We discovered after because the fire came through and wiped out the whole thing. So I'm rebuilding and all of this stuff for the last several years. But there's these oak trees are so resilient, and come to find out, we realized that it's an ancient oak grove.
Wow.
There's
some intense spiritual energy
in the
there.
world.
Yeah.
And you're like going, holy cow.
They have them in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, nature is, she's a powerful.
She's a powerful force. And I just, and growing up on the Atlantic Ocean, which is one of the most formidable places on earth, I think I just recognized that what I was seeing in nature was also replicated in the body. Meaning that if we are living our lives in this state of trying to overpower the body with every little ache and pain and condition, then not only we're not in alignment, but we're fighting a losing battle.
Right. Yeah, we're going against the rhythms, which is, it's part of that whole thing, the biorhythms that, we can jump right into it, but that's such a very important thing that we seem to even override, even in the, obviously there's a pharmaceutical space that we just bluntly give whatever pill or
imminent domain too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And at the same time can easily be applied and take this special supplement, this new thing on the market, and it's going to produce the same. So you can almost have the same idea even with supplements, but there's these foundational principles that when overlooked have massive implication on the body.
It's so true. And I always was raised to believe that you can either always argue for your strengths or your limitations, period. So you have to be really selective about the vernacular that you're using in the verbiage. So people discard the fact that when a newborn baby is born, that baby is born with something like 100 billion neurons in their brain. They don't have the fully formed synapses, but that's the exact number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So tell me that this isn't a gift that we're here. 400 trillion processes have to occur perfectly in our genetic makeup for us to take our first breath. So the universe has been rigged in our favor since the get.
Right.
So when we talk about, this narrative that exists in our society of my knee's acting up or this is happening, we need to overpower the body with some type of pain management. And I'm not negating that that's not factual. Right. But the body's trying to have a conversation with us. Yeah. And it was Deepak Chopra who said something really game-changing when I was first starting out. And he said, when we listen to our bodies and ourselves, we're eavesdropping on divine intelligence. And that I have found to be true. The people that I have worked with that have had the most terminal illnesses that prognostically were given 3 months, 6 months, and they survived. And they're thriving to this day. Things like brain cancer and small B-cell lymphoma, things that are very difficult to treat. Their mentality and their story that they told themselves was that their body was doing what it needed to do to rectify itself. And they treated that diagnosis as, this is just another experience. It's like, okay, you have this diagnosis, what's for lunch? Because what I find is when we take the power out of our innate selves and out of our biology and we put it in a diagnosis, or we put it in, really clapping for the pink ribbons or the whatever the cause is that, it on paper, I think, looks to rally in support of whatever illness we're dealing with. We're actually taking power away from ourselves and from our body's eminent domain of, we need to have the conversation about what's misaligned, because the body will communicate it. If you eat something that you're allergic to, what's the first place that responds in your body? Your mouth. Yeah. Your lips will swell up. Your tongue will swell up. Yeah. Your body is always showing us the point of injury. So if we can take a beat, take a breath, and really sit in that communication with our bodies, we can not only learn so much, but we can really fundamentally heal on a level that I think no one has permitted us to believe in Western medicine.
Yeah, we've divorced a lot of stuff, you know, and you could argue it's kind of been, you know, engineered that way to almost, you know, divorce us of this connective aspect that we have to ourselves innately.
I do actually cement that theory that we've been intentionally divorced from that, because there's no money in healthy people. There's only money in sick and dying people. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's become an industry.
Right. And it's not even conspiratorial, because it's literally a business operating system.
Correct. That
we find ourselves in. And so if you just think of it very simply in those terms, you look at every big corporation, every ultra processed food, they have their shareholders, they have that whole thing. And then on top of it, the medical model, the sick kind of reactive model, we're born into this thing going, is this
right?
Is this really?
Right.
And it's almost like, what's your thoughts on, I love the power thing, because the white coat, the easily, you know, punting our power, it's almost to this, in this aspect, this deep aspect of like, I'm broken. I get a diagnosis, I have this pain, I have this cancer thing, you know what I mean? Whatever the diagnosis is, there's something wrong with my body.
Right.
Right? To your point, maybe we've just neutered the symbiosis and the symbiotic nature of the listening.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm so curious. I want to hear directly from you. Your book's amazing.
Thank you.
And the genesis of that is so,
it's a wild story.
Obviously, I'm getting, people are starting to understand your connective tissue of why and how you view the world, especially as a doctor. And then because obviously, I've done some solo episodes on the circadian rhythms and this innate, every cell in the body is programmed to the stars and the tides and the rhythms of the sun and the light, and it's so phenomenal. But then you've discovered a little more to that.
Yeah. So I had the benefit of having a really amazing upbringing, and I think there are no coincidences in the universe, only incidences that coincide. And so as much as I didn't want to be raised in the family where, you know, I would get to a certain age and I'd go to my friend's house and I'm like, oh, you guys don't all have Buddha statues in your house? You don't all sit on the floor and use chopsticks? Right. But it was my mom who really offered this platform of like, nothing is off limits, nothing's too crazy, nothing's too outlandish. And it was this free space to imagine. And I spent a lot of time in nature as a child. I had a really solitary childhood, and I mean that in the most beautiful way. In that I was the baby of 3, and my older brother and sister were much older, so they didn't necessarily want to hang out with me. Yeah. But we were surrounded by woods. So it would be me and my dogs, and we would go out into nature, and I just started noticing things. And I started noticing the bugs and the flora and the fauna and how they would respond. And I would speak to the trees without even understanding that was a thing. Sure. I just felt like they were listening to me. And even if they weren't, it made me feel better. And I also was parented to a degree by my godmother, who was very, I suppose they would call it backwoods medicine at the time. But I watched her, and she had this daycare where she had children from infancy to school age, 20 at a time by herself. And it was this really well-oiled machine, and she would doctor them and fix them up. And as I grew up and I got older, I would help her start to doctor them. Wow. But it wasn't with ibuprofen and Tylenol and things of that nature. It was if someone has a toothache, you put rubbing alcohol on the outside of their face and it draws the inflammation and pain out. Turns out that works. It was, if you have a colicky baby, you put a little fennel from the garden in the bottle with some warm water. Turns out that works. So all of these sort of like witch doctor things that I grew up very, very much as part of my normalcy. So that being said, I had this innate curiosity of my life was so intuitive and my life was so sort of woo-woo, I guess you could say, that I needed the science. I needed the data. So I said, I'm going to pursue a career in medicine, in science. And I'll never forget it. And I wrote about this in my first book, Olien, that I did a round on Oncology ward. And I came back to my room. I was shadowing and deciding, is this really the right path for me? And I remember that I was washing my hair in the shower and I saw the face of this radiation patient who was not there, but was there. And I heard this voice that I can only describe as my voice, the voice of creator, of God, of universe. And the voice said, Olivia, does this look like healing to you? And before I could even offer an answer in my mind, that same voice said, no, this looks like dying. You have to find a different way. In that moment, I said, okay, this is my life's purpose. This is what I'm going to embark upon. So I pursued natural medicine. And it turned out that a lot of the things that my godmother taught me early on were very well known in the field of natural medicine, which was the foundational science of our country until the 20s. And there was a propaganda for pharmaceuticals that came in, and natural medicine was actually outlawed for about 60 years in the United States. It just got reinstituted not that long ago. And so I finished my degree and I had a very, very small 2-room office, and I had really just sort of put out a sign, and this was way before the wellness movement. And I was in a small town in Maine. So people definitely thought I was a witch doctor back then, and maybe they weren't wrong. And one day this woman knocked on my door and she came in and she said, are you a doctor? Can you help me? And I said, come on in, sit down. And we had a conversation. And she said, listen, I need to tell you something. I had a dream about you and I came to find you. And I said, lady, I think you're mistaken. I don't think whatever you have going on, I don't think that I'm the person that can help you. Still very unsure of even the path that I was on, because there was no space for it at that time. And she said, I've just been diagnosed with small B-cell lymphoma, which is a type of cancer that's very difficult to treat. And she said, my dad was diagnosed and given a year to live, and he died in a year. And my brother was diagnosed and given a year to live, and he died in a year. And she said, and I've also been recently diagnosed with MS, and you're going to fix me. You're going to cure me. Just so matter of fact. And it wasn't until that moment of hearing someone else say to me, Olivia, this is the next step on your path. I think up until that point, I was still like, maybe I should open a flower shop or something like that. Right. When you're stepping into your purpose, I think we expect it to be some sort of fanfare or, the red carpet rolled out. That was not my experience. It was very much me stepping into an arena that I was not sure that I was suited for. Mm. And I said, okay, well, let's start at the beginning. And so we really started peeling back the layers. And her cancer was so complex that she needed to have labs done very, very frequently. And so as we were sort of peeling back the layers on the nutrition and on all of the other pharmacological agents that she was on, turns out she didn't have MS. She was unnecessarily diagnosed and taking toxic medications, which made her sensitive to sunlight. So we got rid of that. And then we really started dialing in on the nutrition. And I started to see her blood move inch by inch when we would do certain things like mindfulness. And then we'd also add in turmeric, or we would add in other components. And we started rebuilding the GI tract. And she, at that time, I think was given 6 months to live. And 30 days after we started working together, she went to go see her oncologist, and her cancer had recessed by 12%. And they said, oh, great, the new treatments are working, meaning their treatments. And the pills that she was supposed to be taking that she wasn't. Right. But she didn't tell her doctor this. And so 6 months in, her cancer had recessed by 70%. Throughout her entire body. And her oncologist looked at her and said, what are you doing? Because I don't think that this is the medication. And she said, well, I'm working with this woman. You got to be kind of open to what she's going to tell you, because it's not just supplements. It's not just nutrition. This is mind body. And this is about having that conversation with your body and continuing to have that conversation. And 8 months after the first time that she walked into my office and said that I was going to cure her, she was considered in spontaneous remission from cancer after she was given a very, very finite time that she was going to live. And that was 13 years ago.
Wow.
And today she gardens. She plays with her grandchildren. She lives the most beautiful life. She's taken up this love of nature photography. And that was my first patient. And that was the one that really set me on the path of like, Olivia, there's something so much deeper here. And so I used her as my first beta analysis of there are patterns in the body and there are patterns in the blood. We understand circadian rhythms. It's been at this point a very well-developed science. And I started thinking, if we are this biological matrix that's existing in this environment, we're not a part of that. We're a part of that, not a part from that. And so I started researching patterns in nature and diseases and illnesses, and the number 7 became so prevalent. It was blaringly obvious to me that there was a circaseptan, which later became the namesake of it, that was occurring in the body. And so as I began to work with more and more clients, that became the standard of care. I said, we're going to monitor your blood for 7 days to determine what is the pattern. Because at that point, I still hadn't really drilled down to the smallest particle to determine what's going on here. I just knew that there was something that was happening.
And the cool thing about you is that you weren't just flinging supplements at people. You were very clearly testing along the way, like crazy. Like you were getting that feedback all the time. And so you were seeing like ebbs and flows of a 7 rhythm, 7 something, right?
Yeah.
And that was the genesis of it. And again, I just want to emphasize, you were using science, but you were coming at it from a completely different point of view. And
yeah, I knew that it was as if the body was trying to leave us a voicemail, but the voicemail box was full. So we had to empty out all of the old messaging, all of the old programming, which of course was maybe old disease processes, maybe old emotional narratives, maybe old energetic imprints. There's a lot that we store in there. And as time went on, and I began to see that there was, in fact, a 7-day cycle, but it was not the same for every person. Every person had their own individual day where their levels of testosterone, estrogen, uric acid, their bodies seemed to have this volcanic effect. So there was a crescendo, there was a purge, and then it seemed like the waters sort of settled after that. But I couldn't define what that was or what the etiology of that 7th day was. And so I immersed myself in nature and I just went really deep. And I remember it so clearly that I had been immersed in just sort of researching what could the pattern be. And I was sitting on my back deck looking out at the woods, and a tree had been cut. And I remember looking at the rings of the tree and for whatever reason started to go into this space where I recognized that trees keep cellular memory of every injury, of every drought, of every famine, of every disease that has passed through their network of trees in their communication. And I recognized in that moment that the body's keeping a score of the most traumatic event that it will ever live through, which is being born. Because you go from this baby that is not fully self-sufficient into this world of sensation and sight and sound. And all of a sudden you are fully launched into independent processes like respiration on your own and digestion on your own and excrement on your own, all of these things. And it happens like that, at least in Western society. Right. Now, if we go back to other ancient cultures, birth was a very divine experience where we were in the dark And now we understand that there's a direct link between melatonin production and melatonin repletion and being able to trigger a woman's labor when it's stalled. We understand that if a woman has stalled labor, we can give her melatonin and put her in a dark room and labor will begin again. So we're really deeply synced into these rhythms.
Wow.
And the icing on the cake for me was when I found out that the electromagnetic resonance of the earth, which is 528 megahertz, is the exact rhythm that our heartbeat sinks into when we are born. That, for me, made everything make sense.
Right. Jeez. You know, it's again, the inherent connection. And I love that you went back to nature to start. This reminds me of a moment about 25 years ago when I met this guy. It's a whole crazy story, but this one guy, Dr. Mohsen Hermanish, up in Santa Cruz, started telling me stuff that I've never heard in my life. And he was talking about rhythms. He was talking about divorcing of nature or not following it. And that changed how I looked at everything, not to the degree at which, but he said simple things like observing nature, a bird, a squirrel, when it's going to eat the nut, when it's going to harvest the fruit on a tree. Like when those things are ready, they're not going to touch it. So like those little observational moments are freaking everywhere, right? So then, so in these rhythms, because I've looked at the circadian rhythm as a big whole, but you've broken it down into seeing these patterns. I can't imagine, because if you're seeing rhythms like with one person in a 7-day cycle, but that the next person, there may be a rhythm there, but it's different and it's happening differently at different times. How the hell did you do enough testing in that many people to start to understand that, you know, the birth process was very innately powerful in the starting or whatever you want to call it, the rhythm of that 7-day cycle? How did you possibly come to that conclusion? It's just mind-blowing.
Well, it really is, and the journey has been extraordinary, nothing short of it. But I've been really blessed in that it wasn't very long before I started having these results with clients that I was contacted by clients that I think were of means that they had private doctors, but they wanted the edge on their healthcare. And so I sort of said, okay, well, let's sort of gather this in across demographically. If these people have access to this, let's really look at the data and look at the numbers. So I had all of the numbers. I just didn't know what to do with it. It was like this puzzle that I was missing the corner piece and also the centerpiece too. So for me, thankfully, due to my upbringing, I just immerse myself in nature, and I immerse myself in the darkness in the most positive way of self. I sit with self and I wait for the answers to come. And I listen. And I always tell my patients and my clients, I'm not really teaching you anything. I'm just helping your body remember what it already knows, because this is so much bigger than me. Right. And so I really believe the energy was there, and I just had to listen hard enough for it. And so as I witnessed these rings on the tree that communicated 50 years of drought and famine and forest fire, and there was this record, there was a cellular record, it really launched me into this space of our bodies just keeping a cellular record. Yeah. And in natural medicine, there's something called Hering's Law of Cure. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but essentially the principle is that you heal from top to bottom and from inside out. Meaning that if I'm treating you for a condition that's presenting today, we're going to go all the way back into your cells and we're going to purge it from the inside out. So, and this is, you can Google this, you can research this. I have seen people who are healing from cardiovascular conditions or cancers, and they will display for 12 hours, maybe a day. Chickenpox they had when they were 12, and then it recedes. Even though they've had no exposure to it, their body, our computer, is purging that memory.
How would it show up? Because obviously they're not having chickenpox again, but how would it?
It simply replicates on the skin, and it has a presentation, and then it recedes. So for anybody that watches this, Herring's Law of Cure, I invite you to really investigate that, because that's one of the foundational elements of medicine in this country that we've lost over time. And now we're really kind of spoiled that we have all of these diagnostic tests and things like that we don't have to rely on some of those foundational pillars. But for me, it was just watching the patterns. And I really immersed myself in theology and religion. And I don't subscribe to any religion other than nature and source and energy and whatever that means in that moment, in that day, in that space. And in nature, sevens were everywhere. They were just everywhere. So, there's the diatonic scale, which is what we base Western music on, has 7 ranges, 7 colors in the rainbow. And then all throughout religion and spirituality, 7 chakras, 7 continents. It was just so prevalent. And so I kept seeing this number 7 over and over and over again, but I couldn't nail down what it was until the moment when I really was focused in on the rings of the tree. And I thought, there's a cellular record of trauma. And that's what we're seeing here. And then it became time to identify what is the trauma. And so I really sat with that for a while. And when I say sat with that, I kind of like had it on my radar, and I would go about my daily life. And I was doing the asking, as I say. And in my life, anytime I'm at a crossroads or a juxtaposition, I go into a process of the asking, which doesn't mean that you sit in lotus in meditation and expect to receive the answer. It means that I ask, and because the universe is an echo to everything that we think and feel and do and say and speak, I knew that it was coming. And so I asked, and it answered. And
you don't know necessarily when that's going to answer, but you open yourself up to the question, and the question gets to be filled by this universal principle. Yeah.
And so what I've built from that is this sort of infusion of spirituality and science. And I think that for the longest time, sort of the division in medicine and why people are sicker than ever, but also asking to be healed more than ever, which we see in our society, is because they think they have to choose one or the other. Turns out the answer is both. The answer is the infusion. And so what I really saw in religion and theology and in nature and in biology, I mean, all you have to do is take any viral illness, pneumonia, malaria, even COVID. And these illnesses all peak at 7 days. If you were to receive an organ transplant, your body is going to reject that organ on the 7th day, the 14th day, and every 7th day thereafter. So the body keeps this record of trauma that it's always trying to revert back to, because your body is the most intelligent supercomputer in the universe.
Yeah, so it's I mean, that goes so deep in terms of the record, like the epidemiological, even our ancestors and all of that other stuff. So drilling down that initial trauma, and I have a lot of energy around this because I was premature. I was 4 pounds.
Wow.
And in my master's in psychology program, we did this regression thing. I won't get too far into it, but we were regressing every month when we would come together and do our workshops and our study. We would regress in a certain age period, and then we got all the way down to nothing and 0. And I just shut my eyes, because you can't possibly go there cognitively. Like, what happened at 0? Like, what happened at birth? But the counselor took me through. I shut my eyes, surrendered to it, and I had a spontaneous, complete recapitulation, but also biologically, of my birth. I saw it. I felt it. I had fluid. I had an energy that was so palpable that released from my spine and shot up, and I just exploded and crying and fluid, and like I couldn't have stopped it if I wanted to. So when I realized that, and that's why when I was reading your book, I was like, the moment of birth is so intense, and they thought I was going to die, and this was in 1970. So they were like, technically I was 3.5 pounds, and the first thing was just so intense already at birth, but then the first moments were like, is he going to live? And there was no connecting to mom. It was just poking and prodding and shoved into a incubator.
Invasive.
Right? And so every time there's a child or someone's like, that moment is already traumatic already, but there's so much information in that. But anyway, so how did you then get to that point where you fully realized that this cycle started with the intensity of the birth itself? And that was like, I guess that would be is that technically day 1 then?
So that's your day 7.
Day 7, yes.
Yeah.
Day
so
7.
if we think about, our bodies, and if you think about the graph of your blood, if you were to take it every 7 days, you will see this, as I said, crescendo on days 6 and then into 7. It's really this volcanic eruption of all of these different hormones and, bodily toxins and cellular waste and all of these things, because your body's having that repeat. And it's really no different. And this is really the way that it was making sense to me in my mind, is when we experience post-traumatic stress disorder, and our body replicates that, because I was working with one of my patients that was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. And she said, Olivia, when I'm having a trigger of this event, my body doesn't know the difference. And it was like, click.
Right.
Your body doesn't know the difference. It's just repeating that cycle, because everything in nature is cyclical. And we understand everything. We even understand that there is a species of cicada that emerges every 7 years. It actually goes underground. And to biorhythms, it waits 7 years and then reemerges. We understand that these things move in 7-day, 7-year cycles all throughout nature. And, I think that there's been a disconnection from that, because there's such a strong foundation in religion. But there are also things in religion that still hold a lot of weight for medically and, holistically, how we could live our lives more completely today. And I think that I really wanted to make sure that it was bipartisan, that I was not including that just because I had been to Sunday school in New England for 10 years. And I'm like, is this my indoctrination? So I had to test that theory. And so I took all of these results from all of these very, very different clients of mine. I mean, we're talking super affluent, Fortune 500 CEOs, celebrities, and people that I was bartering with for their treatment. They would literally come and bring me loaves of sourdough bread, which honestly is my preferred form of payment. Exactly. And there was this common denominator, and I just thought, wow, this is the body's biggest trauma. Now, fast forward. We're closing in on a couple of decades of this work that it's starting to be proven through science. And now we have the tools to do that. But for a really long time, it was just a theory. It was just a knowing that I had that worked.
Did you ever find any indigenous cultures of any kind, ancient kind of methods, that they were acknowledging the 7-day cycle as well? Not
in terms of biology necessarily, but what I found when I looked into Buddhism and when I looked into, even Aboriginal cultures, is that the way that they were living their lives holistically, globally, was so in sync that their biology was the same as their religion, was the same as their lifestyle. And so there was no segregation. It's really just Western culture that we sort of break those up into bite-sized pieces of this is my health and this is my life and this is my work. And as I tell all of my patients, there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all life. You don't stop living when you do the things that elicit stress or that, can put us in a space where we feel anxious or where we feel emotions that we prefer not to feel. So I think that, again, really dialing back the clock to just the origins of how are we intended to function as an organism in this biological matrix.
So it became obvious through literally test after test, thousands and thousands of tests and hundreds of patients. It just became obvious that this kind of birth center was the start of this clock that we have.
It became obvious, and then anecdotally, the conversations that I was having with them as well, where we would notice that on that day, there was this sort of eruption of toxins and all of these things, and they were more inflamed, and they seemed to be more irritable, and it always seemed like, oh, I hate Tuesdays, but I don't know why, or like Thursdays always suck for me. And then we just sort of started unpacking that and having conversations. Is there a root cause of that? And what is that? And as we started to discuss it, we recognized sort of collectively that throughout their entire life, they had never really liked Mondays, or they had gotten injured on a Thursday, and that was their day 7. And so you could almost follow the inflammatory processes of the body. And what really sealed the deal for me was when I began to get heavily involved in the world of oncology, which is not necessarily a field that I wanted to dip my toe in the water of, because that's a huge business in Western society. Yeah. And here I am, this very woo-woo hippie, doctor in the Northeast. I'm not taking on big pharma. I don't even want to take on big pharma. I don't, I'm just doing what I do. But when I started working with cancer patients and they were getting their blood drawn as ancillary panels compared to what I was doing, and they would go for the same tests that their oncologist was ordering, but they would have dramatically different results depending on the day of the week. And about 10 years ago, the National Institute of Health implemented 7-day chemotherapy cycles. They didn't know why. They didn't have the science behind it, but they recognized that patients responded better when chemo was divided up into 7-day cycles. So adverse effect, but I was like, okay, there's really something to this. And you can imagine the impact that has. If I take your blood on a Monday and that's your day 7, and then the next week I take your blood on a Thursday, right? You're going to look much sicker on a Monday. So what's going to be ordered for you? More drugs.
Right.
More pharmaceuticals, more tests, more interventions. So the impact of what I had uncovered became so much bigger than just trying to help people feel better. I felt like I was an astronomer that had discovered this galaxy, but nobody had the telescope to see it yet.
Right.
But I could tell everybody about it. And I could articulate where it was and how it behaved and all of these things. But for a really long time, it was just having that vision of noticing those patterns.
And you had enough to support your left brain from the science, because in order to support the hippie side of you and the observational side of you and the listening side of you, you need it. Because your number one patient, talk about intense.
And
right?
People were getting better.
Yeah.
That was also the science.
Yeah.
People were getting better, and they didn't know or care why. And their Western medicine docs didn't know or care why. And then their oncologists started asking for my card. And so that they could work with me. Because
which is big for them.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's big. But it was just this really sort of wild momentum that ensued of we don't necessarily understand this process isn't completely fleshed out. This is a new science It really starts out as, a spiritual theory that's evolving into a science. So there are no rules. And we have to kind of uncover the rules as we go. And that's a really rocky process when you're in the realm of people's lives.
Yeah.
And people are counting on you to give them guidance. But I feel every day so blessed. And I feel now more than ever that the last 20 years of my career, we're just now getting the diagnostics and the proof of, and now Western medicine is jumping in and going, there's such a thing as circaseptan rhythms.
Yeah, just today you forwarded me that PubMed.
Yeah.
What was that article?
That's an abstract where they are looking into the bacterial behavior that performs in 7-day cycles and how it correlates to the rest of the body.
Right.
And now, 20 years later, I look back and I go, gosh, Olivia, why didn't you just have the observation of you think circadian rhythms are the only rhythm in the body? This is one of probably thousands that we will discover.
Right.
And I really have felt like, as I said, that I was Galileo and I'm looking out and I'm like, there's a whole universe out there. But when people can't see it, you have to believe it enough to show them the way. And so thankfully I had that, really in-depth spiritual base that I grew up with that really helped me guide it. And every time that I felt unsure, every time that I thought, gosh, Olivia, is this a thing? Is this really a thing? I would go back into nature and it would prove itself to me. And the answer would come in one form or another. Or it would be the way that nature behaved, or it would be an animal that showed up, or it would be some sort of correspondence from the energy and from the asking that I was sending out, which is, of course, the way that ancient tribes have done it for millennia.
Yeah, and then of course in this world that we're living, you would test to validate this knowing, this receiving, and that's the cool thing, because it validates. I mean, I think you said it, the coming together of both, right? There's a reason for it, but maybe it's a little misguided and reduced outside of the holistic lens, the normal kind of way to quote unquote treat somebody.
Yeah.
But it makes the whole thing. I think anyone realizing that in our minds we are separate at times, but there is no way we are separate in any form, in any way, from anything. And that's the beauty of this, what you discovered in the 7-day cycle. This one way of looking at things is that deep understanding that all of things are interconnected, and then specific to that individual, the birth process starts on this 7-day cycle. And we'll get into what each kind of day is, because I love that, and you're very clear in the book on the rhythms and the expression, and you're very pragmatic with all of this stuff to allow people to kind of relearn this. So with that 7-day cycle, how did you know upon that birth and that trauma? I guess why do you think that is beneficial for the body? Because every cycle, it's because when you explain it, you're like, this is a traumatic thing that it's just repeating. And if we look at mental health, we don't want to repeat trauma, right? But yet, at the same time, the body is doing something and it's repairing and recovering and everything else. But if we have an idea of our life that we need to produce and we need to be accomplished and we need to have my goal and I got to overwork myself, and we just have this idea of what our life is, why do you think the 7-day cycle is so necessary biorhythm, and what is its purpose?
Wow, I love that question. So if we can look at, you talked a little bit about trauma, and I work in the mental and behavioral health space a lot, primarily with veterans and psychedelic therapies, and taking veterans with post-traumatic stress that's very, very complex and treating it with psychedelic therapies as well as EMDR and things of that nature that have been phenomenally successful. So if we can look at chronic inflammation in the body, and we can equate that and put that on the same level as chronic trauma. Trauma that we've spent years in therapy, it's not getting resolved, and we formulate an addiction or we formulate some other type of unhealthy coping mechanism. Those are really sort of on the same wavelength. Those are on the same plane. So the problem isn't that it occurs, because we can stick a pin in that and we can look at acute trauma and we can look at acute inflammation. Both serve a really, really strong purpose in the body. Acute inflammation, if you cut your leg, if you get injured, your body's going to swell in response to that. That's to keep you alive, and that's to encapsulate that injury. There's so much value in that inflammation. There is so much value in going through a traumatic event as long as you are continuously unpacking it and reapplying the knowledge that you now have to other situations in your life. That's the value of trauma, and that's the value of inflammation. They are on the same wavelength when it comes to how your body receives it. And that is another thing that I discovered, is that our body, and we hear a lot about anti-inflammatory. Inflammation is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just not chronically a good thing.
Right.
So it's our body's way of trying to purge chronic inflammation, which we gain through a variety of things, through stress, through our psychoemotive state, more often than not, but it could be through environmental factors, so on and so forth. So the 7-day cycle is our body's sort of get out of jail free card, where it's like, hey, we're going to give you an extra hand. All of the environmental stressors and toxins, and say you had an injury and there's still some cellular debris we need to clean out. It's our body's cleansing cycle. So there's benefit in that. And in the same way that when we do not deal with that acute trauma, and it's allowed to lay dormant or untouched or masked by other coping mechanisms, it loses its value. But if we can have growth, if we can have emotional growth on the other side of a trauma, then it has immense value. If we can have cellular purge and replenishment, in other words, our body comes out of a detox phase in the 7-day cycle and it goes, I need to make more osteoclasts. Oh, I need more red blood cells. I need this. Our body is this computer, and the computer always, as we all know, because we are all living with them, we need to update our software and our hardware periodically. That is what the 7-day cycle is. It is our hardware update. And when people ask me about supplements, and I get this question a lot, or about taking anything, I use the computer analogy. I say, your body is a computer. And every time you give your body something that is not in liquid form, or that it has to think about breaking down, you open up another window on your computer and another one. And so here's a soft drink. Here's a ibuprofen, here's a antibiotic, and we all know what happens to computers when we open up too many windows. So the 7-day cycle, the unique and I think divine design is that it's giving us this opportunity to replenish and to come out regenerated on the other side of that.
It's almost like, as you're talking, it's like, it kind of is what it is. Right? You know, it's like if we follow circadian rhythm, the sun goes down, melatonin starts dripping, and we fall asleep, and we hopefully get some early light. And if you go against that and you don't sleep well, you're going to have all kinds of issues, right? So you go against the literal force of nature herself, right? And this is like almost, I love how you put it. It's our own little more individualized cycle, right? Based on, I was like, oh, well, it is what it is. Birth is gnarly. Like, you know, it's just, it kind of is what it is.
And some are really traumatic births, like you were talking about your experience.
Yeah. I was like, fuck, my mom didn't even touch me for 3 weeks. Like, people can die.
Yeah.
I had a thought this morning because I'm thinking about all this stuff, right? And it never occurred to me because I was breastfed after, once I kind of like, oh, he's going to live. And I'm like, what the hell did they feed me the first 3 weeks? That's
it was a cocktail of things. So typically it's a variety of nutrients that are all sort of mixed together in a bag. At least that's modern neo-NICU science. And it's not like, it's not a Michelin 4-star meal for sure. So probably I would venture to guess that you have more of an affinity for avocado than the average person.
Avocado.
So avocado is the closest food that chemically matches colostrum found in breast milk, that early breast milk. So your body is calling for that. So for the rest of your life, you're probably going to have an affinity for avocado and try and sneak it in everywhere. And those little cues are still part of the cycle. They're still part of that 7 days. So it's really interesting that you brought up the sort of touch component and the food component. And it's just sort of our body's way, I think, of always course correcting.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, for me, it's like one part of my brain, it's like, oh, it makes sense. It's just now looking more acutely at a pattern that is just, if we're going to take a body, this is how it's done. Like you grow in the womb and then you're birthed and then it starts its own little cycle. And then you've gotten to figure out that cycle. So it's not bad. It's a blueprint, right? It's understanding. And now it goes more from, the circadian rhythm and follow the light. And there's, most people are, using lights and the modern world has co-opted so much, right? So we need to kind of break that down and start to engineer our lives a little more close to the rhythms of nature. But then this gets so specific on the day-to-day, right? And at least, and it's almost like, I don't know if you've probably had these thoughts. How is it that I, right, as you, are discovering something? And it's like, I get this all the time. I spent 15 years running around the planet looking at botanicals and in the middle of nowhere and having some indigenous dude telling me about 27 things that I've never heard of and no one has ever seen it in any product. And I'm going, and it does this and this and this. And I know you're a big fan of Cat's Claw, and Cat's Claw was one of those things too. And I think way underutilized. But I was drinking Cat's Claw tea from the vine in the middle of the jungle, right? Like cut it and mature Cat's Claw and drinking the water. And the point is that next to that, the medicine cabinet that we have on this planet, we're not using, we've cut it off. The indigenous people hopefully are, and they're not, using so much of the Western model. But that's the power that we have sitting here. And so my point is that I've several times in weird situations in countries, whether it's Southeast Asia, Africa, India, I'm sitting there going, how does no one know about this? Yeah. I've never heard it. And it's like, it's not on a Google search. And so I've had those moments where I'm sitting there going, this is crazy. And so I can only imagine you in your non-traditional, which is wonderful, actually quite indigenous way of getting exposed to the way you were growing up, and from the people around you and your grandmother or godmother?
My godmother. Yeah.
And then you've actually taken so much of that and not pushed it away and nurtured this part of you, this awareness of you and with you and this receptivity, but then applied strong science to support it. But at the same time, because I know people are going to go, how do we not know about this? Right? And so have you several times sitting there going, you're looking around for years, you're not seeing it, you're not showing other people talking about it, but yet for you, this almost matrix has opened itself up to you. The 7 cycle situation is just completely showing itself, and you're getting you're getting people to benefit from it. And if that's not the best form of proving to you that you're on to something, I'm just curious, like, how have you transcended, number one, you're not seeing anyone else, quote unquote, doing it. You're kind of on your own island. Like, what was that journey like?
It's still wild, but my whole life has really been wild. So it's kind of par for the course. Actually, Wikipedia just instituted circaseptan rhythm as an official term recently. Right. When we were writing the book, and Sarah Tolland, my co-author, my writer, was like, we have to call this something. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to call it. I just do it. So 7 days. And she's like, all right. And we came up with circaseptan rhythm. And all of a sudden you started seeing it everywhere. And my sister actually sent me a link the other day, and she said, do you know that I typed in best books on circaseptan rhythm, and yours is the only one that pops up? So it's like, it is kind of crazy. But I also have a really strong sense of self, which I've always had. So I extrapolate myself from the message. I'm just the messenger.
Right.
So it doesn't have as much to do with me as it does, I'm just a good listener. I'm just the conduit. However, the inverse of that is that when I was sort of formulating this and I was trying it out with patients, and I had one very famous patient in LA, actually, I think I can say the name, posthumously Larry King, because his wife Sean is a wonderful friend of mine, and he was ill and he was being treated, and somehow she found me, because I don't advertise, you have to know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and I like it that way. And she said, I need you to help. And so I said, okay, well, I'll take a look at everything. And immediately I said, okay, well, he's, whatever he was on, I said he needs to be switched over to, and I attempted to have a conversation with his doctor. And I remember so distinctly, it was like my moment where for the first time I got mad. And I don't get mad, but this doctor said to me, I understand what you're saying about the 7 days and how we need to adjust putting him on this medication to that medication. He said, but I don't recognize natural medicine, and I refuse to take direction from a woman.
What?
Yeah. And that was
literally came out
of his mouth. So his wonderful wife actually kind of like got one of the nurses on the side to run the test I was asking for, flash positive, changed his meds.
So you went around him.
She went around him. She's an angel. Saved his life. And he went on to live several more years after that. Wow. And I don't discuss these things other than to articulate the point of, fortunately or unfortunately, it takes someone that's in that position of power to prove a point to the medical establishment that if someone offers you insight or a ticket on a rocket ship, you don't ask window or aisle seat. You just take that information. And that's how I've always absorbed things. That it's not about me, it's about the process. I'm grateful to be involved in the process of hopefully moving medicine forward, healing forward, helping people to understand. And that's why I'm here. It has very little to do with my education. I think everything teed up correctly. I think I was, everything happens as it's supposed to. But I just have always had this really deep thirst for truth. And the way that I make my decisions is that, something either feels like you're making a choice or a decision, or you're coming to a conclusion based out of love or out of fear.
Yeah.
It's really that simple.
Yeah.
And so I just kept choosing love. Like what felt like love for the body, and what felt like love for, this patient, what felt like this is why I'm here. And I don't necessarily even think that I discovered a process. I think I synced into a process that was there. And I think I just had the platform, and I had the right patients, and I had the right time in history to bring it forward. And I had then, after that experience, a little bit of FU. I'm somebody that really if you tell me that I can't do something, I'm going to do it twice and take pictures, you know?
Exactly.
So then it really snowballed.
Well, it kind of goes to the whole thing of like your cultivation of your own self and your cultivation of your relationship with the creator, and the self is the truth, right? And the listening. And once you get that, then that information, like there's no person closer to you than you.
Yeah.
And then there's no person that is in between you and the creator. And if we just sit with that, and so you became a receptacle for something that needed to be out there and as service to people. So let's there's so much to talk about here.
So much.
I think we're going to have to do this again, because we got to talk about mountain biking and motocross.
All
and
the
like
things.
all this. Like you're
sports.
such an interesting person. It's like, so I'm like, she's on a motorcycle? I saw it like, oh my God. Because I'm like a rabid Supercross fan. It's my favorite. It's
selective adrenaline. That's what I tell people.
Yeah.
You know, when it's non-selective adrenaline, it's like you're always operating from fight or flight. Bad. Again, like chronic trauma, chronic inflammation and trauma, bad. But I'm choosing this like exhilaration. Yeah. You know, and
on the right day.
On the right day.
Yeah.
Less prone to injury.
So I'm going to use myself as an example. So if I looked, I quickly chat GPT'd my birthday, which is November 4th, 1970, which is a Wednesday.
Okay.
So I'm on technically day 6 today then,
so
right?
Tomorrow's your day 7.
So, and that starts and it's interesting because as I'm reading your book, I'm like going, oh, that's inconvenient for this kind of the workout that I normally do. So it's like, it's reorienting. So let's just kind of quickly to give people an idea of what that is. So today I'm getting ready to be rebirthed, right? Basically, my tomorrow is my birthday of the week.
Yeah.
Right? So what's happening? Do you want to talk through 1 through, or do you want to talk about 7 and then we can jump to 1?
Yeah, we can go through the whole process. So right now for you, if we use you as an example, and the analogy that I always give is that there's this building process in the body. Mm-hmm. So your body's undergoing a natural process of detoxification. So tomorrow, say, for example, you said, you know what, Olivia, I really want to detox. That would be the best day because your body's working with you. Mm-hmm. So day 7, as much as our body's already naturally detoxing, that's going to give it an additional oomph behind it. Mm-hmm. So today you might feel a little bit more inflamed, maybe a little bit more stiff, maybe a little bit more disorganized. If your mental clarity isn't on point, that's okay because we have all of these inflammatory factors that are kind of...
Because today is my 6th.
So you're preparing for this purge, right? Mm-hmm. And then tomorrow will really be that, as we said, the crescendo or the storm, as we articulated in the book, where your body's going to replicate that event of being born, which for you was pretty traumatic and pretty invasive. Mm-hmm. So the day 7 would be the day that I would not advise people to have surgical procedures. I would not advise you, if you want to do extreme sports, okay, but you may be more prone to injury and you may be more prone to lasting injury. And then after that, so you're going to want to give your body what it needs to detox. Mm-hmm. So that means limiting or avoiding alcohol, refined sugar, all of the things that you're probably already doing. But for the average person, these are considerations to make. Mm-hmm. And that may mean that if you say, absolutely not, Olivia, I have to have my glass of wine, then okay, you have 1 glass and not, 3 or several. So I'm a huge proponent of the joy factor. And when I work with clients, I tell them, look, this is the roadmap. I'm giving you an energetic and an emotional and a spiritual and a biological roadmap. You can make detours. You can stop off and enjoy the view. Sure. But you have to keep in sight where you're going.
Just be aware.
Be aware. And the joy factor of it trumps everything else. Mm-hmm. So if I'm telling you not to do something on a certain day, but that brings you an enormous amount of joy, you should do the thing that brings you an enormous amount of joy. Mm-hmm. that being said, tomorrow will be your most inflammatory day. If we were to take your blood tomorrow,
I'm being birthed.
Yeah, you're being birthed. You're being birthed, baby. If we were to take your blood tomorrow, you're going to look a lot sicker than you are the rest of the week. So that's where it really coincides with Western medicine. We have to have some sort of a schedule in the future that's implemented where we understand where's the most accurate diagnostic. After that, on your day one, if you think about an infant that's born, and that first day is not, it's not necessarily cathartic. It's not serene. It's really the next day. Typically that first night, that infant is still kind of getting used to its body and its skin and touch and sensation. So the day one is when the waters start to settle, right? So your levels start to normalize. All of your hormones start to re-regulate. Your body starts to sort of sift through the debris. And we use the analogy in the book of like Times Square on January 1, right? Where it's like, okay, we've got a lot to clean up here. How are we going to do that? We've got street sweepers and we've got people on the sidewalk. And that's really what your body's doing, is it's signaling those T cells and it's saying, okay, how do we need to repair now that the dust has settled? Day 2 is slightly improved. Now, day 2 into days 3 and 4, now for me, those are the peak days. If you really want to get the most clear analysis of blood work or imaging, you're going to want to look at really between day 3 and 4 because the dust has mostly settled and you're not sort of going upending it on to day 5 and 6. So remember that day 6 and 7 is 6 is the build and then 7 is the crescendo. So on day 5, that could go either way depending on your lifestyle, your choices. Are you traveling? Are you going through emotive stressors? You know, and then there's that whole multifactorial aspect of your emotions. And there is a guidebook in the book that sort of gives you these mantras of how to check in with yourself, not just your body, because you know, our emotions don't live outside of our body. Our psyche doesn't live outside of our body, but our cells listen to our emotions and our cells listen to our thoughts.
Right.
So that's sort of the roadmap of it. So if you're going to do an extreme sport, I would recommend your best days for doing that are on days 2 through 4. You're less prone to injury. If you're going to have a
even if you're going to hit a workout really hard.
If you're going to hit a workout really hard, dude, and you could even probably dip into day 5, but I wouldn't advocate for like running those miles or running that marathon on a day 7 certainly, but probably not even 6 because your inflammatory markers are just going to be higher, which is going to set you up for the greater potential of injury.
I can imagine this applied to performance. People gotta lose their mind if they get this right.
I've had the benefit of working with some professional athletes over the course of my career, and it's had that effect. It literally changes how people live their lives. Wow. And I don't mean it necessarily changes the behaviors or the events, but it changes how they feel about what they're doing. Because that's also energy. It's not necessarily about what you're doing. It's about how you feel about what you're doing. And this isn't necessary. I'm not giving you revolutionary supplements in the book. Cat's claw, you're aware of it. A lot of people are aware of it. Turmeric, very well known. But it's about when you take it and how you take it. That there is a window where it is more effective.
Yeah, this whole thing is like, and I really strongly encourage people. The book is great and it's very pragmatic, and you start to really understand. It's just an orientation that we haven't thought about, right? And if you really start to apply it, it's tools, man. It's just a whole nother set of tools that you can hyper individualize for you. Because you are born on a particular day, and you have, and I love it. It's already, like I said, it's already infusing in me. And even if, like you said, it's not so hardwired, but if you have the awareness, like I really like to do that. It's a little intense, but I know that this day isn't the greatest day for me to do that. But just having the awareness of like, maybe back off a little bit or whatever. It's just so powerful. And I can't imagine from the healing art of it all for people really struggling with so much going on in today's world that it's something that needs to be applied more and more. It's so powerful. And I really encourage, again, the amount of work and tests you have done is mind-boggling. So this is not necessarily the hippie part of you
Correct.
coming up with that book.
Correct.
This is the receptive part of you was receiving information, but you validate it to the point where you've got new terms and you've got people looking into it, and you've got, again, it's rhythms. Why the hell do we have 7 days of the week?
Right.
I mean, duh. These are those moments, these aha moments, and I think this book is an aha moment, and the work you've done, I'm blown away. I'm stoked, and yeah, let's for sure do this again. I like to ask people, because I really believe at my heart, everything I do, I want people to live a super life. I want people to live like, if you weren't suffering from illness and a body that was dragging, and you had like all of what the modern world throws at us for stress and stuff, I want people to, what would life be like? What would you be doing? What would you be creating? What would you be expressing if all of those things were possible? What do you believe is the biggest thing people need to know or to learn or to acquire to have a super life?
Wow, that's such a great question. For me, as it applies to health and wellness, I think the number one thing is that we have this narrative that we are separate from our body. Our body is an extension of our psyche and our emotions. Our thoughts influence our cells. I think that we have come far enough, thanks to the likes of Bruce Lipton, and others that have really taught us about the field of epigenetics, that this is we are just on the tip of the iceberg. So our body is an extension of our thoughts. And you can look at your body right now as you're listening to me say these words, and you can disagree with that. But if you really sit with yourself, I want you to invite the conversation with your body. Your body is not trying to work against you. It's not trying to act up. It's not trying to harm you. Your body is programmed to survive in really, really adverse conditions. As I said in the beginning, we are hardwired in with the universe. Your heart rhythm is literally in sync with the earth spinning on its axis. You have the same number of brain cells in your brain when you were born that there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. You cannot tell me that the universe has not been rigged in your favor for this body to survive and thrive since the beginning. So invite the conversation with the body. For a lot of people, they may feel very far away from that. So when you dive into the book, let it meet you where it's at. Journal some, and then set it down, and then come back to it. Have an appetite for it. But if you really, especially if you're somebody that's dealing with an autoimmune condition, which has the highest prevalency for women more than men, but our country more than any other country in the world, and it's an epidemic, we'll just take an autoimmune condition. Your body's hardwired to survive in really, really extreme and adverse conditions. It will keep you alive. So if you are experiencing an autoimmune condition, first and foremostly, I would suggest tests, which are listed in the book, for autoimmune viruses. That's the biological, that's the science part of it. But ask yourself, where am I at war with myself? In what part of my heart or my soul or my mind or my spirit or my body? Because our bodies can hold physiological emotive trauma. We know this. Ask yourself, and then sit with that. Go into a dark space, go into a dark room. See if you can find where in your body that's located. Give it a name, give it a color. Have a conversation with it, because I guarantee you that trauma, that pain, that disease, it wants to move out of your body. It just wants you to open up the floor for the conversation. Yeah. And your body knows what to do to heal. It's the mind that we have to kind of silence and get out of the way of.
Yeah, get back in the body, get back in the heart, and trust that this universe is geared in our favor, and so is our body. I love Absolutely. It. I'm grateful for the work you've done in the career that you've had, and thank you for putting it in a book and a gift to people that are willing to take it on. Thank you.
So welcome. Thank you for having me. This is exceptional. And thank you for the work that you do.
You betcha. Cool.